Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. A few weeks ago, I visited with Dr. Hillard Pouncy, a good friend, and we were engaged in a conversation about values, the changing values in this country, particularly religion or established religion, and a survey that had been done by the Wall Street Journal reporting that millennials, young people generally, are not as religious as they used to be, and making the distinction between religion and spirituality. That older people tended to be, not surprisingly, more religious, but even they are beginning to move away from the old-time religion. And we were talking about the implications of that, the reasons for that, and what the future might look like. So we're going to continue the discussion this morning about what is happening with established religion in the world, but particularly in countries like ours, which have been traditionally were based on Judeo-Christian principles, and what the future might look like. And I realize it's pure speculation. Good morning. How are you, Doctor? Good to see you again.
Rick, it's good to be back, and I want to circle back a little bit and make sure we're on the same page. We were responding a couple of weeks ago to a survey featured in the Wall Street Journal, and the headline of the survey had been significant generational changes around patriotism, religion, and other values. And so it wasn't so much that millennials had changed out of some religiosity, et cetera. It was that there were difference in reported levels of religiosity between millennials and older generations. And there wasn't, I didn't detect any evidence that per se older generations or younger generations themselves had changed in their levels of religiosity. The big point was simply there was a difference between the generations. At least that was my understanding of the poll. And in addition to that, there were noted differences in other values like patriotism, et cetera. Yep. And so the question had been, so what? And that's where we got, and that's where this show ended. Right. And so the reason I wanted to come back is because I think there were some, for me anyway, and we talked about this earlier, and to you as well, some really interesting possibilities out of that survey. So I'm going to sketch them out fairly quickly, and then, as usual on your show, we get to have an exciting discussion about why we just can't seem to see eye to eye. This
one I think is going to be different because I don't have an answer. You don't have an answer. So
but yet we get to talk about it, which is the exciting. Yeah, if we don't know the answer, you can say pretty much what you feel, which is always exciting. So the nub of this thing had been that while the press that this poll got emphasized differences, there was an unnoted part of it, which were similarities, meaning that across the generations there was widespread support for hard work, value of hard work, value of diversity, surprisingly, at least to me, but also a value for being able to support your, what is it? I think return on effort. I'm getting the exact term wrong, but the idea is if I work hard, that I should
ROI, return on investment.
Yes, well, I assume that's right, but what it means bluntly is, if I'm working really hard, I should have something to show for it, and so all generations agree it's important to work hard. All generations agree it's good that our country is diverse, and all generations agree, and it's good to be rewarded for your effort. Where the problems come in are the perception that I no longer see a reward for my effort, and I don't see a pathway to a bright, shiny future, especially for millennials. And so that's where this short knife edge came from. And out of that then came these observations that we now see differences across generations in other things like patriotism and religion. And those were the two big ones, but there were these others as well. And one final cherry on the sundae had been that millennials did something other generations hadn't done, which was also important, which is that they supported or showed more interest in local community-based activity. So you could make a possibility starts to show up, which is in the absence of participation in traditional institutions, let's say religion, just to go for the big one. But then the unobserved possibility was that they're doing something else, which might be hard for other generations to even know, well, what are those kids doing? And if you ask the kids, they say, well, I'm involved in my community or some other local-based activity. And that's what becomes a big black box about, well, what is that? And what does that mean? And is it a substitution? You can easily imagine it. Mm-hmm. One final thing to set the table, because we're going to have a great meal today. Another element of that survey had been the researchers had then done some comparative assessments. And they'd said, you know, what's really interesting to us is that the way the United States looks now looks a little bit like what Europe used to look like in previous surveys. I think they took it out to 40 years ago. Maybe it was only 20 years ago. I don't, this isn't my research, so I'm doing third-hand reporting. But the point of it had been that the prediction on what all this means for the future in our country would be to say, well, take a look at Europe. There lies the future. Lower family formation rates, less value on having kids, for example. Some of us might say, great. Mm-hmm. Personal aside. Look, kids are great. Kids are great. But lower religiosity, it would be the big one. And so, and then you'd say, well, then what would that tell me? Europe doesn't seem, do I think Europe is in good shape or not? Well, I haven't been to Europe for a while, so I really can't report on that. But what I can note is that was the implication of that poll, that we're seeing in the future is over there for our country. Now, and that sets the table for what I think you and I both agreed might be
interesting. That was one of the findings of the survey. I didn't remember that one.
So follow the breadcrumbs. The breadcrumbs were differences by cross-generation in religiosity. Yes. That's as far as the survey went.
Right.
Right. And in preparing for your show, which I always do, as you know, I did a little homework. And in doing my homework, I found a pretty interesting discussion on WBUR in late August. In fact, I think they used some of the researchers who'd done the polling. And what they had noted was, in their own assessment of what they had found, they were so struck by these changes across generations that they said, I know what this looks like. And that's where what I'm bringing to the table, which is, at least the people who did the poll, they noted that this reminded them of what Europe, similar kinds of polls about Europe several decades ago also found.
If there is or will be some comparability between what we are becoming and what Europe is and is tending towards, then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, there's some other data points that make the conversation interesting as well. And I can't quote you stats, it's in the murky back of my mind, but the contentment and happiness indices in Europe, other than the Scandinavian countries, but in Western Europe, have been going down, right? There are all kinds of reasons. Their economies are in turmoil. They're losing their sovereign identity for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is the influx of refugees from all other parts of the country. But Europe is Western Europe is in absolute chaos, losing its roots, losing its purpose, losing its sense of identity, I believe, based on what I've read and people I've talked to from that part of the world. The Scandinavian countries are interesting in that, from what I see and what I remember of the data, the level of contentment and happiness, however you define those in this conversation, as we've agreed before, that's always the elephant in the room. How do you define patriotism? How do you define religiosity, etc.? But let's assume that that's not an issue here. But what accounts for that difference in Europe level of contentment? Is it because Scandinavian countries, by and large, are freer thinking? Because I think they are. They're not hung up on religiosity. They've developed their own social standards that pretty much come down to this is the way we are, these are the people we are, this is the way we behave, this is what we expect of one another. And that used to be called religion. The Catholic religion, the Jewish religion, Hindu, Muslim, whatever. There is a code that governs behavior, right? And over the years, the generations, that has served us well as a stabilizer and as a governor on human behavior to temper the bad impulses that most human beings have. Am I making myself clear?
Oh, no, you're being perfectly clear. In fact, that's why I came back to the show to talk about this, because these are the exact kinds of questions you would want to come out of in thinking about these surveys. So what I would start with, and it would be, I take a little different track. So I'm not sure what the data show on quote-unquote contentment, how happy people are. In fact, one of the complaints about the Wall Street Journal poll had been this idea that millennials tend to value self-fulfillment more than their parents. And the complaint had been, you kids shouldn't be happy, you should be miserable like we were. So you can't have...
No, there's another reading on that, and I feel it myself. You should earn the right. You should earn the right. You haven't yet earned it. So you're not entitled to be happy too early.
What's got me chuckling is the cartoons about the boomers, we boomers, and when my favorite one is the lawn meme. You know, get off my lawn, you kids. You know, because we're supposed to be grumpy and unhappy. So if the Europeans are unhappy, shouldn't we be thrilled that this is the fate of our country? But on a less serious take on this thing, where I thought you were going to go with this is certainly where I went, is that. So if you're trying to replace religion, because let's cut to the chase. That's what this. That's
my question.
Yeah,
in the absence of traditional religion, what will we have? What are we fashioning now?
No, I think that's the right. I think that I agree with that question, and the obvious thought is, well, we don't know, obviously, but it's such an interesting thing to speculate about. And if you don't mind, I'll go first.
No, let me just say this one thing. As you know, I've got an HR background.
No.
40 years. Yeah,
no.
As a consultant in HR. And years and years ago, it was quite apparent to me and others.
Actually, I did not know that. I like to be silly on your show for some reason. But
it's so easy for you.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
The good old days are back.
Yeah. Years ago, I and others concluded that because institutions were breaking down, confidence and trust in all institutions were breaking down, that companies, employers, large companies and employers particularly, were becoming the substitutes, the surrogates for religion, education, government, every institution that we've known and grown up with. But corporations have begun to take on that role. They educate their employees and they indoctrinate their employees. There is a kind of religiosity in most organizations, strong organizations, we call it culture. And that culture dictates behavior, what you think, how you behave, how you interact with one another, what's expected of you. If that ain't religion, I don't know what is, but it's a code. In terms of education and religion and dictating how we behave in a particular environment. And that kind of scares me, that corporations have taken on that role. Because I'm not sure who's going to govern the corporations.
Well, that's a long-standing concern of, well, certainly of mine as well. But I think
but we don't have a complete vacuum.
No. I think you're actually strangely on target on this occasion. I might even become silent. I'm just it's such a change. But I would run it backwards. I think I share your insight, but I would have a different take on it. I thought that companies had been religious. I thought the companies of our parents had been total institutions, right? They had provided retirement benefits. They had provided healthcare benefits while you were with the company. They had provided a location for you to go to, and that they had been a family, that kind of thing. So you got a job at General Motors and you were set for life, you know, and you got benefits included discounts on the car, and at parties you would be Ford people and GM. So I thought that was the tradition previously, and in the decline of institutions, which has produced this generational divide, the loss of the corporation, the loss of corporate identity had been among the victims of that thing. So that as opposed to ruining the rise of a corporate religion, I thought the game we were playing was the sadness at the decline of the corporate religion, with one caveat. The rise of the new company, Apple, Google, etc. There you might, I think, be onto something. I have no personal experience with this, but I read and I watch, and my understanding is that these are total institutions.
Oh, they are.
They foment a certain lifestyle,
Absolutely.
right? You get free food, apparently, at the cafeteria, and it should be healthy. They worry about stuff, the millennials do, and they're creating a country in their image. And so there you might be on to something. And the only question I would have is, well, is that enough? Because like it or not, the old Fortune 500 that produced our parents' world, they were big and impactful, and they took employment of most people in the country. I don't think Google employs that many people.
No, but those companies, as you just described them, coexisted with strong institutions.
Yes, that's right.
Strong
including
established
unions.
religion,
Yes.
unions,
Right.
government,
Right.
etc.,
Right.
education.
Yes.
And we trusted more in those institutions. We didn't question them.
Right. Well, but it's a circular thing. In other words, the institutions worked, so they were trusted. With the decline of institutions,
Right.
well, why would you trust a company that felt free to terminate your position and take your job and move it out and not leave you with any serious benefits? I mean, that's asking a lot of people to trust that.
That gets us into a whole other area. Whatever happened to company loyalty?
Well,
It doesn't
yes,
exist.
that's right. It should
doesn't
be.
exist
As an HR guy, I'm sure you have a lot to say about that.
yeah, well, that's another subject.
Right, but I think now we can turn our attention to the large question, which is, if not religion, then what? Okay, so there we go. And I think your take on this, just for the record, is, well, if you look at Europe, not to make a pun, but it's unlike that. All hell's about to break loose without trust in religion. And your definition of hell seems to be Europe, where they have the good Jesus. That'd be hell. That'd take me there. So
Look at Italy. Look at Ireland.
where they have pizza. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. But for the purposes of our conversation, which is taking a strange tack, Europe has Europe has been defined as hell. Okay. So what does that mean for our country?
Yes.
And the issue is, if you take it as a given, and it seems to be something that we should probably just prepare. Wishing and thinking and hoping is not going to bring it back. Well, then what's going to replace it? And the good candidates seem to be some sort of local attachment to locale. I think the innocuous version of it is book clubs are certainly a big deal now. And I've asked this. I asked my kid, is that a thing? And he says, oh, that is a thing. Well, at least they're reading. So you got that. Another possibility is that the a need to fulfill personal expressions of attachment to higher causes, etc., produced that stays the same. It's just expressed in different ways. So
Yes.
you get a serious interest in climate control, or what they call civil religion. So you would become attached to, well, oddly, political parties, which would be a European kind of thing, right? Well, I don't know what their parties are anymore, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Another possibility would be the American version of. Well, I'll stick with it. What may be in store for millennials would be attachment to certain kinds of causes, and maybe a reinvigoration of political life as opposed to religious life. And the thing about religion that you have noted, and I now agree with, is that religion provides answers for people, right?
Yep.
So in a search for answers, where would millennials turn to for that kind of thing?
And it's, they turn to themselves.
That wouldn't be a good idea,
They turn
would it?
inward. No, it hasn't worked for them so far. But there's another data point, and from demographics, and you're an expert in this, but as you know, at least the data has shown up to now, that as millennials age, grow older, they tend to take on some of the beliefs and the conservatism of boomers, older adults. So I guess while we're looking at it and saying that something is happening as if millennials are going to stay the same, the chances are they're going to think more like, behave more like older people, boomers, with whom we are much more familiar these days.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So
But
they may
right.
move back to, if
Yes,
not the
yeah,
same
right.
old-fashioned religion,
Right.
something close to it.
Yeah, there are a bunch of X factors. What if we have a big event, big war, big recession, stuff like that? But just for the record, I think they discounted that. In other words, boomers themselves were at a young point a certain level of religiosity, and then they moved. So if you're tracking not how religious millennials are compared to boomers of different ages, but if you compare it to religiosity of boomers at the age of millennials, that's where the gap is still very manifest.
Yeah, Hillard, I don't remember the details, but I don't remember if they broke it out by denominations. Did they break it out by Catholics?
I'm not aware of
or
that.
Protestants
I'm
or
not
whatever?
aware of that. Right.
Because I've got to believe, given when the survey was done, that the mess in the Catholic Church, which has driven many Catholics out of the church, had something to do with those numbers.
I don't know. The short answer is when I did some research for your show, because this isn't what I normally do. My appreciation was that was noted but not taken in as a driver of the material. I think what I would argue might be the issue that determines how millennials go, is that, think about it. In World War II is the defining issue for our parents' generation, right? Out of that thing, they learned that they were I think there were movies with titles like this, that they were certain kinds of solidarities. We're a band of, and then fill in the blank about that. And for, I dare say, our generation, another common experience was the Cold War and its in-game, the Vietnam War, and which was tied to this requirement of service. How are you going to relate to your country as a rule? And of course, we relaxed the rules. This is just volunteer then if you don't really want to do this stuff. And in our lifetime, there were stirring moments like President Kennedy and a call to civic virtue, that kind of thing. Yeah. So what's in store for the millennials? And you could argue, well, isn't that cake already baked, right? I mean, if you're going to have a prime experience, usually that's something that happens in your youth.
Yes.
So shouldn't they already be formed by something? And what's been forming them? Well, they've experienced global terrorism. They've experienced economic instability, but not the sharp point of a depression where being poor became kind of noble, right? I mean, if you look back at that, it's like we ain't got nothing and we're proud of it. I got plenty of nothing. All those tropes about, we're all in this together. Our poverty doesn't define us. We can fight together, all that stuff. Well, the millennials don't have that. In fact, the real counteraction to what they're going through is the change in the institution that you and I think is a primary institution, which is being on a TV show, or how messages get from message givers to audiences, and it's no longer through the controlling heights of mass media. It's now through very, very private media. So how millennials get to see what's going on, and then how they get to organize in response to it has been highly fractured. And I don't know what to make of that. That seems to me to be...
I think what we can be reasonably sure of 20 years from now is that what we will have in place of the old-time religion we've all been accustomed, at least older folks have been accustomed to, is another kind of secularism that will have some of the markings of spirituality, social justice, but not old-time religion, not that brand, not that look, not that field, with all of the liturgy and all the trappings of religion. It will be clearly secular. There will be rules of engagement that govern behavior. People will still be held to account, but not for the same reason, not for moral reasons, but because they're violating somebody else's rights. And that's what's happening today with the whole, everything is, the entire culture that has grown up around social justice, even within institutional religion. Frankly, I still don't understand all of it. And I truly try. So I'm not happy with what I think is going to be happening over the next 20 years. I won't be here to experience it.
Well, don't sell yourself short, Rick.
My children and my grandchildren will, and maybe they'll be happy. And in the final analysis, I guess that's what it's all about. Yeah. If you feel good about yourself, if you feel connected to something that has a higher purpose, and you are in service to others, no matter what you call it, I guess that's a good thing.
I think I sense a wrap up here. Is that or is it?
No, that's the way I'm.
Oh, okay, okay. Because I couldn't. I was searching, thinking, well, do I get to make a comment, or are you saying goodbye to?
I'm coming to terms with something here.
Well, can I throw in a couple of comments?
You would, yes.
Okay, just trying to hang in there with you, Rick. Yeah. Well, what does religion do? It tells you who the good guys and who the bad guys are. That's one thing it does.
Yeah.
Well, let's assume it does. That's by definition. So in this transition to civil religion, let's assume, because I think that's actually, I think you're right. The real issue then would be, well, how would civil religion define who's good and who's bad? The worst case is it pits us against each other. We become a horrific return to the styles of Europe 2 or 3 centuries ago. The other possibility, of course, would be that it defines virtue by the shape of the planet. Maybe the goal of living in a good world is somehow truly valued deeply, like because you don't want outrageous forest fires or floods, which then unites a group, etc. So that's a hopeful possibility.
I guess it comes down to it will be a secular system, the basis of which is do no harm. Now we do have to wrap it up.
Well, if that's possible, Rick, that's a good way to end the show.
Until next time.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. My guest today has been Dr. Hillard Pouncy, a social political researcher, author, lecturer, and so on. And as you can see, he's got some strongly held opinions. And on this one, I think we came close to agreeing on a few things. Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves.